couple of images for you to ponder as we start today. I went to a classical music string thing in Three Rivers last night. Odd place for a country boy to be. So the first group came out, a quartet of young people who have been at Carnegie and are quite well established, have records and stuff, but they were nervous. I think a couple of them were from the area originally, and so they came out and they fiddled with their chairs and they tuned up their violins and they squinted and they looked kind of uncomfortable and their room tensed up. And then they played and it was beautiful. For people who kind of know that stuff, I guess it really was moving or whatever. It's great. So then the headliner was next, and it was noticeably different, right? This is a young woman. She is a professor at the University of Michigan. She played all over the world. She has a Stradivarius violin, right? I mean, the thing. And in contrast to the fussing and the tuning and the kind of getting yourself ready and that kind of stuff, she just walked out, didn't look at any of us, because for her it's just a practice session, right? And then slayed the room. She played something, and I kept thinking, that's bizarre. That sounds like the rhythm of my music, of my life. She was playing a folk song from Czechoslovakia or someplace, but she just absolutely laid it on, right? Pounding the violin and moving along like she was all in her own little world. And when she was done, the house fell down and applauded and shouted and screamed. She just walked off stage. It was the coolest thing ever, right? To see the contrast between somebody who absolutely owns the place, knows what she's there for, understands we don't want to watch her tune up or we don't need any introduction, just play that doggone song and play it as good as you can. She just ripped it up and then went away. For the rest of the night, every other person who came out looked, in contrast, nervous and confused and whatever. It was amazing. Okay, there's one image. Second image. A long time ago and far, far away in a beautiful land called Colorado, we rented a theater, our little church, when Mel Gibson's what was it called? Last Temptation. The Passion. You're going to get me in trouble. The Passion came on. So we have a theater full of Methodists. It's a dicey proposition on a Sunday morning. It's really scary at a theater where they don't have to behave. So and they're doing what Methodists do. You might know the answer to that, right? They're eating and talking a lot. And the theater manager comes out because he's supposed to make announcements and encourage us to rent the theater more. He's like 9, so he comes out in his little tie and he says, excuse me, pardon me, excuse me. He could still be there if I hadn't intervened. So I got up, I walked to the front, and I said to them, the Lord be with you. Immediately, every person said, and also with you, and the theater went quiet. I said, our little pipsqueak here would like to make his announcement. He made his announcement and sat down. Do you see the difference? Right? There are times or opportunities in our life when we should full well know exactly what we're doing and be able to stand up and hold our ground and own the place. And there are circumstances for most of us, most of our life, where we're not altogether positive that we own the place, so we kind of just stumble into it. In the Christian faith, we would hope that there are many areas of your life where you're the boss, right? Where you step on stage and you own it. And you lay down whatever it is you have to lay down with calm and assurance, and you change the course of people's lives. The language that we use for that in the church is that the Holy Spirit gifts different people in different ways. I'm a preacher. If I came up to preach every Sunday after all these years and looked nervous and confused, I know I sometimes appear confused, but I'm never nervous, right? If that happened, you would, after a few years, think, well, maybe that fellow's not really got a calling, right? Especially if there was never any point or the sermons never went anywhere. But I hope that they go somewhere and that you think at the very least he kind of knows what he's doing. The same thing in other gifts of the Spirit. So not everybody's called to be a preacher or a teacher. Some are called to be evangelists. And if you're called to be an evangelist, my hope is that in your conversations in everyday life, whether they're at work or at home or out in the community, you are finding a way to offer Christ, or at least the promise of Christ, to people like a boss, right? Like you know what you're talking about and like you're assured. I don't know what your gift is, but I do know that Scripture promises that everyone has a gift. Everyone has a gift. And I also know this. If you're not employing your gift, then you're going through this life nervously trying to tune up and hoping you don't mess the enterprise up instead of claiming control and going through life with confidence and with inner calm. When we live outside the realm of our faith, when we don't sync up with God's desire for our life, no matter how successful we might be in other arenas according to the rest of the world, internally there's always that doubt, there's always the second guessing, and there's always the nervousness. Christian in any circumstance really should be displayed or understood or seen as having a spirit of calm, because in any circumstance we should be pursuing our calling. Can you say amen to that? I'm going to try to prove this to you now that I stated it. They look like they're just absolutely not going to pay attention. So try this group. You people listen if you want to. Okay, so here is Jesus in the situation, kind of situation that I'm describing. Only in this situation, people are trying to intentionally get him off his game, right? They're trying to make him nervous, or they're trying to get him to say something. They're trying to put him in a vice and kind of help him unravel a little bit. And pay attention to the calm that kind of pervades the story. This is a story that the disciples were so impressed by that many years later when they wrote the gospel, every one of them wrote it into the gospel, right? So it was a big deal for them to see him. These are the enemies of Jesus trying to upset the apple cart as he comes into Jerusalem. Matthew 22. The Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words, and they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why do you put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" And they said, "It's Caesar's." Jesus said to them, "Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And when they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away. So they tried to upset him. They tried to cause a public scene, but he knew exactly who he was and what he was doing there and where he was headed, and no amount of interference from outsiders was going to upset the apple cart. I don't think that any of us will likely ever gain that total control of our lives, but I am promising you today that you can have more control of your lives if you'll focus in on your life as being made to serve God, and if you'll dial in and figure out what it is that God has given you to do. So, we never talk politics in the Methodist Church. How many of you think that's a good idea? Oh, man, you don't live my life, right? That's the best way to disrupt a week. So this is not political. I need to tell you that up front. It's going to sound political, but it's not political at first. If I say that a lot, you'll know that it's true. It's not political. You may know that there is currently now boiling again a long had discussion in the political realm of our country, and that discussion, you may not know this because there's so much going on, but the discussion that's starting to make a little bit of headway is, should clergy lose their tax advantage? You may or may not know also, I have a huge tax advantages, right? It manifests in some odd things. For instance, it's better for me financially to owe on a house when I retire than to own the house, because if I own it, I lose all the tax advantage that clergy have, right? And that's across the board. It's not just Christians. Any clergy of any order has lots of tax advantages. So every few years, somebody comes up and says, that's wrong, that's the government pushing religion, and we should get rid of the clergy tax advantage. And for the sake of the argument, they also say the church should lose its tax-exempt status and pay tax like everybody else. Man, it's crazy to watch ministers when that comes up. They just melt down, right? They just come all undone. If they were violin players, they would be tuning up and a string would break, right? You can see them shattering inside because somebody's messing with them. And I always think the same thing. What is the matter with you? Really, right? I like the tax advantage. That's swell, right? Great. I'm not really a numbers guy, but I know it's fine. But if they take it away, they take it away. I'm not going to go to a march on somebody or sign a petition saying how horrible and unfair it is. Do you know why? Because I wasn't called by God to make sure that clergy get tax advantages. That would be absurd. I don't care. If the price of free speech in the pulpit is I have to pay more tax, then I'm happy to pay it. Really, I'm being sincere with you. I could care less. I almost got booed out of class in seminary when this first came up, right? I was the lone guy going, who cares, right? So we don't make that much money anyway, so it's not like it's going to break us. And you're called to preach, or were you called to write tax law? Do you think that life is always supposed to be fair? What kind of Christianity are you practicing? So tax us if you want to, or don't, right? Whatever way that goes, I'm not going to lose myself over it or try to get you on my side or run around worrying because, my goodness, life might not be overly fair for me for one day. That's just an absurdity. And that's the specific situation, right, of taxes, but it happens in our lives over and over and over again. We center in and we say, okay, I think I know what God is asking me to do, but then interference comes, right? Noise from the outside or the situation changes and you think, well, I better do something about that, right? I got to take care of that first and then I'll pursue my calling. And when that happens, the enemy, right, the evil that exists in the world has defeated you long before you even know you're in a battle. The minute you get distracted from pursuing your calling, the minute all of a sudden you turn your attention aside from the things you've truly decided are fundamentally important and decide you have to give your whole self to that nonsense, you're dead in the water. Your witness is gone. You don't perfect whatever it is that God has given you to pursue, and your life ends up noise and fury. And do you know what happens at the end of the noise and the fury? Somebody tell me. You die. And then you go meet your Maker and have to explain how it is you got trapped into noise and fury all of your life instead of doing what you were called to do. Not a discussion that you want to have. So Jesus is there in the temple square, right, in the capital city, and they think, oh man, we own this guy. We'll just ask him about the tax, and he'll come unglued, and the people will come unglued. You can't answer it because people are so mad about it. Little history on that, just so you'll know. Jewish law forbade the owning or use of graven images. A graven image is an image of any other god besides Yahweh, and there is no image of Yahweh because he's invisible. So the Romans, when they occupied territories, they marched in with their legions, right? The victory parade, mostly just the Romans celebrating, they would march in with standards upon which they had pictures of Caesar. That was common practice. When they overtook Jerusalem and they marched in, the city melted down. It was akin to, in its time and place, what Watts was in the United States, right? I mean, the place came unglued when they marched in with a vestige of Caesar on a banner. And the Romans determined, because it would not settle down, right? It wasn't like a 1 day or 2 day riot. It just kept going. And they were slaughtering hundreds and thousands of people, and the Jews didn't care. The Romans determined, we got to take that banner down, right? We'll make a special exemption for Israel. So Israel was the only occupied territory in the time of Jesus in which there were no standards with Caesar's picture on it, because bad things were going to happen. Even the Romans understood, right? If you want to enslave somebody, you got to have slaves. You can't kill them all over whatever is driving these people insane. So it was a pretty big deal. The people who would have been surrounding Jesus when the Pharisees set him up with this question likely lost people in those riots, right? So they were deadly serious about whether you should pay tax, because tax was paid with a Roman coin, and on the Roman coin was the picture of Caesar, and the inscription was, does anybody know? The Son of God. Because they considered Caesar to be the Son of God, right? So If you're a Roman and you wake up one morning and think, I'd sure like to have a fight on my hands. pretty easy doings in Israel. So here's how it went. After the riots had calmed down, the Romans effectively talked to the leadership of the temple, because that was the leadership of the country, and they said, we'll remove the offending banners, but you're not going to be able to change the coin. So here's the deal. The only thing this coin has to be used for is the paying of tax. So the system evolved this way. It was against the law for people to own a graven image of another god. It's a problem if you can only pay tax in the coin of the realm, which has a picture of Caesar and the words, the Son of God, on it. So what they did was they nuanced and they announced to the people, here's the deal. You don't own the coin. right? You own whatever it is. You trade for the coin at the temple treasury, and we give you the coin. You immediately pay the tax. It is never actually yours. What you own is whatever it is you brought in to trade for it. And that way they could pay the tax with the coin, with Caesar's image on it, and on a technicality they could escape owning a graven image. Makes sense to nobody looks like they want to riot, but I'm telling you they did, right? They hated that they even had to touch a coin with Caesar's image on it, whether they were that pure and holy in their attitude or whether it was just anything having to do with Rome made them sick to their stomachs, hard to tell. But the Pharisees launched a great attack on Jesus, right? There's no way to answer that question. Unless, of course, you don't care. Unless, of course, you have your eye on the prize. If you know what you're doing and why you're doing it and who you're doing it for, if you're assured of those things and you have set a course to follow your particular calling, in his case, to go into the holy city, to do his teachings, and then to die for the sake of humanity, then some numbskull coming up and trying to start a fight does not dissuade you or distract you. He didn't get into a long argument about it, right? He found a pithy way to say, oh, well, do whatever you want to, boys. I have business to take care of. And when he did that, I believe that in the immediate situation, there probably was lots of buzz or whatever, and the disciples probably ended up scratching their head like they always did. But in retrospect, down the road, as they began to pursue their own calling, I'm sure this scene of Jesus refusing the distraction occurred to them many, many times. If you've ever been a leader of anything, then you know leadership really is a matter of trying to set a course and stick to it. And the difficulty with leadership is then, as soon as the course is set, people are trying to distract in a million different ways. Not for such nefarious reasons, but they are. Life is a distraction, right? If you have a goal, the disciples must have channeled this memory of Jesus standing up to the test by pursuing what he was called for many, many times, because their lives were lives of distraction. To be illegal in the realm, to be trying to start a new religion, to have people half confused and semi-Christian, semi-pagan, all those things were distractions. And here's news also. It turns out, historically, if you study, their life was unfair every day. Every day. Every day. It was always unfair. Always unfair. And in order to become what they became, in order to accomplish what they accomplished, they had to be able to live with that fact. They weren't going to get their way. The world wasn't going to see it their way. And they couldn't afford to stop and argue about every little point. They had bigger things to attend to. Are you with me? I'll ask again. What about you? Do you believe that you know God's calling in your life? I will tell you that he did not call you to practice your Christianity solely by sitting in church on Sunday morning. This is supposed to help you along your calling, along the path that he has laid out for you, along that which he has given you the special power to do. So if you think that your calling really is just to be a good church member and come to church on Sunday, that really is not correct. Whatever it is that God has given you to do, whatever special gifts he's given you, they will be primarily approached beyond the walls of this building. Teachers, preachers, evangelists, healers, right? Whatever it is that God has gifted you to do, that should be your concern, your primary concern in your life. If it isn't, if you are currently upset about politics, if you are currently upset about sports, if you are currently upset about the people at work taking extra breaks, if you're currently upset about whatever thing in life, even if it's a very valid point, and you think that your role in life is to change everybody else until they come into agreement with you and life is made fair, I am telling you, you are confused. On the left and the right, even if you won the war, you would win it at the cost of pure hatred on the other side because we're so vitriolic with one another. In Christianity, we are set free, and what we are set free from, if we will come to our right mind, is distractions from what we were created for. No one in this room was created for making life exactly the way you want it to be. You are created to serve in one way or another. Every Christian gift is a gift of serving other people, Christians and non-Christians alike. When you tune into that, right? And begin to practice it and learn it and keep your eye on the prize, then life simplifies a great deal. So I have, in my life as a pastor, I have had lots of trouble with lay people, with SBR committees, with bishops, and I just never really seemed to hit it off all that swell. And in those times, I have been tempted sometimes to say, you know what, I'm going to devote the rest of my life to proving you're wrong. Am I the only one that ever has those thoughts? Where you think, wow, this is a beautiful thing, right? I'm just going to set it all aside and I'll devote myself to writing paper after paper, get them published, I'll go on the TV news. Maybe it's the quirk of a writer, I don't know. And when I was younger, I pursued that nonsense. As I've grown older, here's the conversation I have over and over again with staff, with myself. What should I do? What should I do? This is wrong. It's unfair. It's unhealthy. I don't like it. It hurts my feelings. It's bad. What should I do? And the answer is what I had set out to do. Preach as well as I can, administer the church, make sure the church has a plan, and pursue it. All the rest of it will fall away. Eventually, the noise stops. Eventually, they wear themselves out and they go away. Just pursue the thing that you know is from God, and all the rest cures itself. Or it doesn't, but you don't have to care. Am I making sense? So, in divorce care, we see the transition that people make from the offense and the sheer pain of breaking the covenant, right, of dissolving the marriage. We get to watch people kind of progress along these lines. And what happens is what I'm talking about in a different realm. At first, people can be consumed with, it's not fair, it's not right. They did something wrong, the spouse, right, it was their fault, and therefore I want what I want. I want the stuff, I want the kids, I want whatever, right? And they can get entangled in trying to make sure that for all the losses they took in the romance, they gain in other things. If they stay in that mindset for too long, they damage themselves severely. What we like to see is for people to progress to what I'm talking about now, to where, although those things are still true, they are no longer the first order of the day every day. And they begin to swivel and to ask the fundamental question, what should I become now? Who am I, having had this experience, and what can I do with the rest of my life that is worth spending the rest of my life on? When they make that transition, what settles in on them is a profound peace. So if you think about people as vibrating in a way that you can see it, right? When they come in, they are on full vibrate, or they're just everywhere with anger. And if we do our ministry well, and if they receive it well, at the end of the journey, whether that's 2 or 3 times through the program, they have calmed down considerably because now they have been helped along the way to understand that God still has a course for them and they still can make their life meaningful by giving of their life to other people. It's a really cool thing to see. And it begins to dawn on me after all these years of doing it. What we're seeing there is a template really for what should be happening in church. If you come to church and you're agitated all the time and you feel like you have to go solve some problem that isn't at the heart of the gospel, or that you have to vote politically one way or another, that's why I keep politics out of it, right? Or you feel like your special calling in life is to convince everybody else that they're wrong because you think they're wrong, then really the church, though it might be wildly popular, is hurting its people because it is engaging as its primary function in distractions from its primary function. The primary function of the church is to exist in such a way that we allow you to search and find your calling, and then we encourage you in the pursuit of it. Because when you're doing those things, there is about your life the quality that we all most want: peace. Jesus said, I will leave you peace, and I believe fervently that's what he was talking about. So take a gut check today, right? Take a look at your own life and ask this question. Are you grinding away on stuff that you don't need to grind away on? Have you convinced yourself of the false truth that if you could just make everybody else see it your way, you'd be happy? It is a false truth. They're never going to see it your way in the first place, and it wouldn't make you happy because you're practicing being angry. Or are you in pursuit of what you believe God has called you to do? The The thing that God has called you to be or to do doesn't have to be some history-making thing like Christ himself. It can be that God has called you to be the one who practices forgiveness in the family so that the power of forgiveness and the grace that it unleashes is availed of your family. That can be your calling for a season of your life. If you are pursuing doggedly what God has put in front of his people to do, you will discover, even if around you people make all kinds of trouble, and my God, they will, that you have an inner peace. The woman marched out with her violin and absolutely slayed the place because she'd put in the time and she knew full well what she was doing, and she was actually in a place where she could have a good time instead of worrying and fussing about what anybody's going to think. All she cared about was, I want to make this thing make its music, right? There's just raw power in that kind of event. And you have access to that same power if you keep your eye on the prize. Paul did his best work in prison because he didn't care if they sent him to prison. He cared that in prison he had something to write with so that he could continue his calling. The only reason people would refuse the idea that we proffer today that I can think of is that they might have sat down and thought through the matter and decided that they believe that death is the end of the matter. If you're operating on a short timeline, then you have no choice but to pursue what you want vigorously now before you die, because if you don't, your life will be a waste. I get that. When you see people who are quite obviously distracted from their godly calling, pursuing things with that kind of vigor, you may know about them, they do not believe in eternal life. They think when they draw their last breath, it's said and done, and if they haven't had what they wanted, they'll never get it. The big difference. If you want to know really the huge difference in people who can plow their ground and do what God has called them to do and take a long-term approach to it, and people who want what they want now and are agitated all the time, it is the difference between believing that there is something beyond the flesh and not believing. Well, I kind of thought this would be like a pep rally. I imagined you guys would... We might have stumbled onto something and need a part 2, huh? Let me sum it up for you one more time. Christians are like a bunch of Methodists who one time went to a movie theater. There they were distracted by chocolate and popcorn and the chance to talk and gossip and who knows what they were doing, right? All kinds of stuff. They were in the right place, but they weren't really in the right frame of mind. And when they heard a unifying voice that called them to order, they came to order, and there was peace in that place. That is a picture of what God promises for our lives. If you are distracted, if it's noisy, if it's loud, if you can't get your focus, what you are missing is understanding your life in light of the gospel calling and God's gifting. And if you find those things and begin to pursue them, I promise you the other noise quiets down and loses its power. Okay? Really? Okay, if you'd like to ever figure out what your calling is, my suggestion would be come to church again. Okay, that's really all I had. We better sing.